We all know the stories about the emperors and legions of ancient Rome, right? The big battles, the famous speeches. But what about the actual people? In this explainer, we're going to step back in time and listen to their voices, from the politicians and gladiators to the farmers and merchants, to hear what life was really like in their own words.
Seriously, just think about it. What if you could walk right through the Roman Forum, tap someone on the shoulder, and just ask them how their day is going? What are they worried about? What are they hoping for? Well, we've basically gathered voices that answered those exact questions. And trust me, some of the answers are going to surprise you.
All right, first things first. You can't even begin to understand ancient Rome without getting your head around its social ladder. It was incredibly rigid. For a Roman, your entire world, I mean everything from your job to what you worried about at night, was defined by where you stood on this ladder.
And wow, this contrast just says it all, doesn't it? On one hand, you've got a politician whose biggest problem is, well, winning an argument and bribing someone. His life is a game. On the other hand, a slave whose entire reality is shaped by the constant threat of violence. They're living in the same city, but they might as well be on different planets. This huge gap is pretty much the foundation of Roman society.
So where did this social divide show up the most? Well, in a day's work. You know, for us, a job is usually a 9-to-5 kind of thing. For a Roman, a job could be anything from selling spices in a crowded market to fighting for your life in front of a screaming crowd.
And I mean that literally. For some Romans, the job description was brutally simple: survive the day. The stakes had nothing to do with getting a promotion or hitting a sales target. They were about drawing your next breath.
Just listen to this voice from the arena. Someone asks a gladiator, "What's the hardest part of your job?" And the answer is just so blunt, so simple: not dying. It's not about the glory or the technique, it's about pure survival. Kind of puts a tough day at the office into perspective, huh?
But hey, it wasn't all blood and sand. Far away from the arena, a completely different kind of ambition was thriving. Over in the marketplace, a merchant doesn't talk about survival. He talks about his senses. Smell that? That's success, friend. For him, success is the smell of spices, of goods, of a life built on commerce, not combat.
So, what were Romans doing when they weren't working? Life wasn't all struggle and business, at least not for everyone. Let's take a look at how they spent their free time, from the lazy afternoons of the super rich to the sacred duties of the devout. Here's a little peek into the daily planner of a rich patrician. Wine at noon, bath at 3, politics. But that little note at the end, "if I must," that's the real kicker, isn't it? For the absolute elite, actually running the empire felt like an annoying chore they had to squeeze in between spa treatments. Now, while that patrician was enjoying a private bath, for pretty much everyone else, bathing was a huge public event. The public baths were the absolute center of social life. They weren't exactly places where everyone was equal, class was always a thing, but they were one of the few spots where a senator might actually cross paths with a shopkeeper. And this quote just nails the vibe perfectly. Why are you here? Gossip, steam, and maybe a husband. It was a place to get clean, sure, but it was also where you went to network, make business deals, and maybe even find a spouse. It was like their social media, gym, and community center all rolled into one steamy, noisy building. But you know, life wasn't all about pleasure and social climbing. Take the perspective of a Vestal virgin, a super important priestess. Her reasons for taking a 30-year vow of celibacy? Zero drama. I love that. And then, fascinatingly, also fire safety. A little nod to her sacred job of tending Rome's eternal flame. It's a great reminder that even the most religious roles had some very practical realities. Okay, so far we've pretty much been hanging out inside the city walls. But the engine that powered the whole empire was out on its fringes. So let's hear from the people who lived outside the center of power, out in the fields that fed Rome and in the rowdy taverns where people went to forget their troubles. And this one hits hard. A voice from the fields, telling it like it is. I feed Rome, but I can't afford bread. I mean, how timeless is that? It's the classic paradox of the worker who produces everything but gets almost nothing in return. A struggle that feels incredibly modern. And for something completely different, let's duck into a Roman tavern, where things could clearly get a little out of hand. One person, looking back on their evening, says, "I came for wine, but I think I married a goat." It's just a hilarious, messy, very human snapshot of life, a world away from the polished marble of the Senate. So what's the big takeaway here? It's this. There was no single ancient Rome. It was an empire of a million different realities, all lived side by side every single day. The gladiator, the politician, the farmer, the priestess, they all called themselves Romans, but they were living in completely different worlds.
Which brings us right back to you. After hearing from all these different voices, the politician and the slave, the gladiator and the priestess, the farmer and the partygoer, if you had to choose, whose Rome would you have lived in?